we're talking about this worry that's excessive, frequent, difficult to control. When someone develops an anxiety disorder, it takes over. It causes them to shut down or be really, really irritable, and I keep want to say it makes them anxious, but you know, it's affects all behavior. Yeah.
So if you see this developing in a child, how can you help them to not develop into a full-blown anxiety disorder?
So the ways, the early intervention, does anybody have any ideas about what early intervention for anxiety would be?
Just teaching them to recognize when it's, teaching them to recognize when the signs are happening. So maybe in freshman year when you're like taking honors classes, you're taking all these high achieving courses, and a B is like you're breaking, like you got a B on a test, and now you're in the hallway sobbing. Literally happened last week. And so you maybe want to recognize, okay, well, why is that behavior, like explain to me why this is an irrational thought here.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I was going to suggest, is there's a lot you can influence by looking at the belief system that is behind perfection, okay? I must be perfect all the time. No one is perfect. And so perfectionism is something to address. I think it's skill building in a couple areas. To recognize the thoughts behind the emotion. So I'm sobbing in the hallway because I got a B. So one of the things you explore with that student is, what does that mean that you got a B? Well, you'll find that even when you ask a question like that, and if you have to do it in relationships, you have to have a solid relationship. But when you ask that question, what are you going to find out? They're going to start talking, and they're going to talk themselves right out of the thoughts that were behind it. You know, oh, it means I won't go to an Ivy League school. It means that I'm not smart enough. Usually those kinds of beliefs, though, or the thoughts, go to a core belief that I'm not good enough. So you recognize that, and you can sometimes use a little bit of logic with them. If they're activated to where they can't get to that part of their brain now, you're working on self-regulation skills. So trauma-informed schools, you start every day with, you all start every day with prayer, I'm sure. What if you added 10 minutes of focus on breathing and meditation? Because it's a skill builder. So many there's inner city public school systems that are introducing progressive relaxation, deep breathing, and yoga as mechanisms to teach young people to manage the overwhelming emotions. So, you know, in the moment, if I just got a B, and I feel like that's the end of the earth, and it means that I am not as smart, that everybody knows that I'm not good enough, which is really the kind of core belief that people hold when they have that, is first they have to get through the emotion of that so that they can explore the thoughts and feelings that go with it. So one thing you can do is help students understand the underlying thoughts around perfectionism and what's realistic. What is your self-worth? What's it measured on? You know, I am probably resilient because I get a lot of positive feedback for being kind and caring about people. That's probably why I do what I do. You know, I also got good positive feedback for being a good student, but I didn't come from a family I was the first generation to go to college. And I was the first of my generation to go to college and get a college degree. So there was no expectation to live up to anything. I was there, you know. The fact that I went was fine. So if I had a 3.75, that was fine. I can imagine growing up in a family where everybody does really well and needing to be perfect around that. So what do you do around the personal development of students so that they recognize that perfection in grades isn't the measure of their worth, you know? Other thoughts about anxiety, and that was a good question.
Have you heard of the work of Brené Brown?
I have. I would recommend that if any of you haven't, Dr. Brené Brown is a social worker at the University of Houston. She has a couple of TED Talks out. She also has books, and she has studied vulnerability and shame and kind of how those are the core beliefs that a lot of us hold. So when you ask that, I probably was borrowing. I've read her books and listened to podcasts and heard her speak, not in person, but online a few times. And she would get back to like the tied to, we all have the part of us that feels shame that gets triggered by things, and that usually that's connected to a real strong fear of not being good enough, not being enough. And her work is around kind of transcending that and moving past that. She's easy to read, and there's lots on YouTube with her. So she's a good one to catch up with.
I was going to say, even as Catholic schools, our first go-to should always be prayer. And it's amazing what the power of prayer can do when, a student starts losing it, or they start getting anxious about the choice they made. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with students regarding discipline in my office, and either I start with prayer or I say, before they leave, let's close with prayer. And it just like decompresses. Or I've had, families come for difficult situations to my office, and I say to them, this is beyond you, this is beyond myself. So let's take this to Jesus where it belongs.
Yeah, yeah. Other thoughts about the skills, the things you can do to equip kids with anxiety?
A couple of quick ones I do are, if they're calm and rational, do a quick strength inventory. What are your strengths? What are you naturally good at? And then what do you like to do? What are your hobbies? How do you spend your free time? Just a couple of minutes, and that shifts them into all positive things. And then also, what things do you do for fun? What brings you joy? What makes you laugh? And that just flips a lot of kids around out of the anxiety mode, and we'll focus on that for a little bit.
I think your focus on service in the schools is helpful for that too, because it takes someone outside of themselves. I would say that one of the things that you can add to that is you're looking to build skills. Reflective practice is important for students. And by reflective practice, I mean, why do we do service? What did you notice when you did service? And letting them verbalize the things that, it made me appreciative of all I have. So the opportunity to slow down and process and talk about the things that they're doing. Also, what Mark talked about in doing the strengths inventory with students is to notice afterwards, if you saw that shift for them, to notice. I noticed, Mark, that when you started to talk about what you were good at, that you didn't seem as anxious, and you actually looked calmer, and then wonder, you don't have to say a lot more than, I noticed it, I wonder what that means, because what we're doing is we're slowing down their thinking so that they can, it's called metacognition, they can think about their thinking, and that's what we want to do. So it's your response, and then reflecting and processing. How did that go for you? What was it like for you? I noticed that. What was it like for you? They may even say, I didn't notice that. No. But you still planted a seed. All right. We're going to talk about risk factors for suicide. So, major depression is a risk factor. Problems with alcohol or drugs. Unusual thoughts or behaviors or confusion about reality. I think what that means after reading it is that it's disconnected from reality, peculiar behavior, it's noticing something different. I'm sure that psychosis falls under this, being paranoid about things, that everyone else wouldn't believe are true, having beliefs that are disconnected from reality. Personality traits that create a pattern of intense, unstable relationships or trouble with the law. Those personality traits are things like, to translate it to adolescence, it's high drama relationships. Everything's drama. That's how kids talk about it. And all of their relationships are drama. And it's the kid who in high school who has a girlfriend and then that breaks up, and that's high drama, and then they're on to the next one, and that's high drama, and they kind of create that around them. So that's what they mean by the personality trait. It's also often very much related to trauma and having difficulty with relationships overall. So they desire relationships, don't know how to make friends, but they figure out and get in awful patterns where they're connecting with people in ways that are really not very healthy and that are drama producing, but they somehow become reinforcing. Impulsivity and aggression, and that's in particularly when that's with a mental disorder like depression or bipolar disorder, something like that. So we're worried about impulsivity, that's just making decisions without thinking. It makes sense that would be a suicide risk, right? That you wouldn't stop and think about what you're going to do. Previous suicide attempt or family history of a suicide attempt or mental disorder. There are people that I had a family member who had several suicide attempts before she was successful. She had a lot of trauma and her life was very difficult. And with each successive suicide attempt, the likelihood of success and of another attempt is there. So we know that that's a risk factor. It's also a risk factor if close family members have used suicide. So those are things to pay attention to. I think also serious medical conditions or pain are identified as suicidal predictors. Yeah, go ahead.
You said that if we had a family member who committed suicide, what if it is someone not part of your family, but a friend, a fellow student?
Yeah, because we're going to end today talking about the contagion effect and how to manage that. With adolescents, contagion is really a challenge. So there's some strategies that I found in the literature about preventing that. But so I think that it is a high risk if someone close to you, someone in your social connection has suicided before. I think the other piece is to just say that the majority of people with mental disorders or other risks, other suicidal risks, most of them don't engage in suicidal behavior. So this isn't a checklist that, you're on this list, you're definitely, there's a potential for you committing suicide. We're really worried about you. I don't want to create alarm with this. These are things that you're going to pay attention to, and they're going to tell you to pay more attention to what's happening with the kid, right? Does that make sense?